So now that this data makes sense to you, I can go ahead and explain the candlestick chart. So as you can see, it's not quite an intuitive chart to read, so you need some time to get a hand of it. But this chart, as you can imagine, this chart represents this table, this data. So you can also choose to represent all these columns as simple line plots. So you'd have a chart with 4 lines, so one for each of these attributes: open, high, low, close. And so you could have a line that lies along the daytime axis, so daytime as x-axis, and then you have this value. So let's say you have a red line for open, and then you have a green line for high, and then another color for low, and another color for close. So you'd have a chart with 4 lines. So that would be a simple representation that I'm sure you can make by yourself. But this chart here is more difficult. And actually there are 2 difficulties there. The first one, as I said, is the difficulty in reading this chart. So I'll explain that. And the second difficulty is the way of building this. So as you can see, you have actually 2 kinds of glyphs, 2 kinds of figures here, which are called glyphs in the bokeh vocabulary. So you have rectangle glyphs, and which can also be quadrant glyphs. So you have to choose whether you want to use quadrants or rectangles to represent these boxes. And also you have some lines, which could be segments. So you have to build these glyphs. But before building them, of course, as a developer of this chart, you have to understand what these figures mean. So here is a table, and I'd like to put that here. So these data are plotted exactly in this chart. So this chart is a representation of this data. Let's start by explaining the first rectangle there. So as you can see, the rectangle has a lower border and an upper border. So let's say top and bottom. So the bottom is has a value of somewhere at 704 here, and 718, 19 maybe. So 704, which corresponds with this open value. So this first figure here represents the first row of the data frame, and every figure represents a row of the data frame, one by one. So as you can imagine now, the bottom of the rectangle is the open price, and the top is the closing price. So these 2 values. And then you have the low and the high. The low now is the lower coordinate, so the lower value of the segment, and the high value is the upper value of the segment, which happens to be behind the box in this case. So this is a special case. And then you have the date, so this is for 1st of March, so the month and the day. So before going into further detail, let's go to another glyph. So let's explain this one here. So the lower border is somewhere at 712, which is this closing price here, and then 718 for the open price. So closing price here, open price here. But for this we had open price here, closing price here. And that brings us to the point that rectangles colored in red represent those days where the closing price was lower than the opening price, which means that for that particular price has decreased throughout the day. So for this company, so for Google, this is the Google company, the opening of the day it was 718, and then it went down to 712. So you have a red rectangle. But for this day, the price opened at 703 and it closed at 718. So the price was positive for the day, it went up. That's why you have a different color. So you have to put the color as well with bokeh when you build the chart. And then again you have the segment, which always represents the highest price for the upper point and the lowest price for the upper point for that particular day. And yeah, that's it. It's quite a sophisticated representation of data, and it can be of great interest if you're working with stock market data. And if you're not working with stock market data, then it's still good, because you learn a few tricks with pandas and also the bokeh library. So for sure you want to follow the next lectures. And so that's about explaining things. In the next lecture we go ahead and build this chart. So see you there.